Welcome to the One Human Nation Show. I'm your host, Sandy Batiste. I'm getting off to a fun start for today. It's just a little thing called turning up the volume. I hope your week is going well. I've got an exciting show with our guest today, Koy McDermott, who was here a couple of weeks ago. Fascinating information that wanted him to come back and share more insight. And I guess if I have to have a theme for today's show, it would be how to avoid having a defeated spirit. There have been a couple of things going on in Savannah that has a concern for me, and I'll share those with you in a few minutes. As we get ready to listen to the One Human Nation show today, remember the viewpoints expressed in the following program are not necessarily those of WRUU, its license holder, or its staff. So a couple of things in reference to today's show, as well as the daily journey that we hopefully all recognize that we need to go through to get to the reconciliation process. And what that looks like for each person is really an individual process. And this show is about creating a safe, honest, open environment so that people feel comfortable in sharing their stories, and we can have a productive dialogue about race and reconciliation, so we can move towards becoming one human nation. So as you know, I've moved back to Savannah. This is home for me. I was born and raised here. And there, as in any city, there's always areas that may have more problems with crime than others. And it's always been in my part of town, the south side of Savannah, a relatively sleepy type place. And there have been a couple of incidents that's happened this week that I think has shook the community to its core, because it involved youth in our city, 16, 17 years old, and the outcome for one wasn't well. They died. And when we talk about, how is this happening? How are our youth even, getting access to having guns and firearms and just that whole process of going through pulling a trigger to harm someone else, trying to get my head around that this week. And this happened, a week or so ago. It is really one of those things that I want to talk more to our guest speaker about, because his parents were immigrants from Jamaica. He moved here at a young age. He spent some time living in Philadelphia before he moved to Texas. And it brings to mind another conversation that I had with someone this week, or came up with the topic we were talking about. And it was, just chatting. And it's this concept of privilege and entitlement. So, as you know, my definition of racism is based on a system of privilege that, as a person of color, I don't have access to. The system is not geared typically in my favor, and it's a difficult thing to adjust to, but it's I shouldn't say difficult. It's part of the reconciliation process. It's part of the journey. It's how do you get that balance? And there is a sense, and it to me, it doesn't matter what your cultural makeup. There seems to be a pattern in the United States of a sense of entitlement. And it doesn't even seem to matter what the economic status is. There's a certain sense of living in this country that we're entitled to certain things. And I think that's part of where we have the disconnect with younger generations, is when the sense of entitlement doesn't match the reality of what's going to happen or starts to happen in the real world for them. And I've often said it's something that we have to address at a very young age. I mean, before someone even enters third grade. I'm talking about at a very young age, because what's been very eye-opening to me is as I continue to acclimate being back in Savannah and listening to city council meetings and reading information and just trying to get my head around, okay, what's going on in the city? Where are we as a community with reconciliation? Why is there such a disconnect? And it's an ongoing conversation that I think part of it is, and I see little hints of it in things that the city of Savannah is doing as far as making the steps towards even presenting the resolution to change the name of Talmadge Bridge and some other things going around in reference to the Confederate monuments. And so there are things there that are happening. And in some ways, it appears to be a very slow process, but at least the process is happening. So the question becomes, when you start living day to day and you get to a certain point in your journey that you are awake and aware, how do you avoid not having a defeated spirit? Because things are going to happen, and I don't think it's realistic to think that those things are not going to have an impact, especially when it involves someone at a very young age that has lost their life. They no longer have this opportunity to do wonderful things in our society, in our community. And how can we justify that, or how can we balance that in our day-to-day? What do we need to do to address it? And I know this is some of the same dilemma that people in the school system and leadership positions are trying to resolve. And I'm sure Savannah is not the only community that's dealing with this, but it is definitely something that I think we have to take a very close look at. And I think a lot of it is determined with or is driven by, what are we sharing with our youth? How are we connecting with our youth? Because I think part of it is they're just not buying it. They're not buying the I don't want to say propaganda, but they're not buying into all things are well, because all things are not well in their world. And this goes back to, I've mentioned it before on the show, that there's an African tribe that when they greet each other, they don't greet each other by saying, how are you doing? They greet each other by asking the question in their language of, how are all the children doing? Are all the children well? I think is exactly how the quote goes, or the translation goes. Are all the children well? And, if the response is, well, I don't have children, or my children are already, grown and adults, or I don't, that doesn't apply to me. That's not the question. And I think if we start asking ourselves the question, are all the children well? And we're honest about that answer, I think we can start moving in the right direction. But until we answer that question and start addressing that question, and coming up with some solutions to how can we help all of the children to be well? And there's our caller calling in. So we're going to go to a break, and I will be back with you soon.
Collective Face Theater Ensemble presents the imaginary rabbit play Harvey, Fridays through Sundays for the first 3 weekends in December. The show is at the Kennedy Auditorium on the Savannah State University campus, 4724 LaRoche Avenue in Savannah. To find out more, 912-232-0018 or collectiveface.org.
If your business enjoys our programming on WRUULP, please support the station with a donation. Let your customers, neighbors, and friends know that you share our vision of building a thriving community based on diverse, vibrant radio programming. As a business partner, our listeners will know you support Savannah's only broad-based community radio station. Become a tower sponsor or underwriter. To check out the levels of corporate sponsorship and to donate, go to www.wruu.org/business. Again, to check out the levels of corporate sponsorship and to donate, go to www.wruu.org/business. Thank you for listening to and supporting WRUULP.
But you said that this audio does sound okay, Sandy? Yes, I can. Is this audio any better? Oh. Oh, okay. Okay. Okay.
Hi, Koy. This is Sandy. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Welcome to the One Human Nation show. And I think the audience can hear you okay. Were you calling from your car?
I am. I am actually on my way right now to go and grab my daughter. I had a project out in San Antonio that brought me out here.
Okay.
And to get there in time, I was like, all right, I am unfortunately going to have to take this from the car. So
Okay.
I've got you on my hands free. I'm safe.
Okay.
I don't have my cell phone up to my ear or anything crazy like that.
Okay, because I was like, yeah, he sounds a little different today, but it's all good.
Yeah.
It's all good. So, thank you for joining the One Human Nation show. I've been trying to control my enthusiasm so I can have somewhat of a coherent flow to kind of build on the show previously. One of the things that struck me in our conversation and in your narrative of being having immigrant parents from Jamaica, that you know, coming from a third world country, your perception of the United States is going to be a little different from someone else probably that was born and raised here than my perception. And what I want to ask you is, how did you go about, getting that balance from, kind of realizing the way things were in the United States as it surrounds race and racism compared to what you may have been exposed to or your parents exposed to? How did that realization, or how did you get your balance about that?
That is a very loaded question, and I believe that the reason that that's such a loaded question is because I was faced with that yesterday.
Oh.
And I was the opening keynote speaker for Austin Energy's Corporate Learning Week, and I was there speaking about the different generations, of course, and then I had individuals, because I have an activity at the very beginning of all of my engagements, and in this activity I had individuals identify with a particular generation, right? Whether they were a baby boomer, Generation X, Generation Y, and then of course I speak about Generation Z as well, although in most of the companies that I go to, there's typically not anyone from Generation Z yet.
Right.
But there were two individuals that came up to me afterwards and said, hey, would you mind if we gave you some feedback? And I was like, yeah, sure, of course. And they were like, the engagement was amazing. The presentation was great, super great energy. But at the very beginning, when you were asking individuals how they identified, because we are from another country, we didn't know how we should identify. So if you could define what those generations are as far as years, then that would really be helpful for individuals who are not from the United States, who just do not identify with baby boomer, Generation X, Generation Y, or Millennial. It would really help us to be able to be a bit more engaged in that activity at the very beginning.
Interesting.
And as you now ask me that question, I think about that as well. And what I come back to is never sacrifice your authenticity in search of others' approval. And really, that just comes down to you being you. Because I've got so many, friends, even when I was younger, they're, oh, man, you never heard this song before? Or whoa. You don't eat sweet potato pie? Or anything. I'm just like, no, I don't. And no, I haven't heard this song before, right? And just knowing and understanding that it's okay. Knowing and understanding that the value that you bring to this world is your difference. And actually holding on to that, embracing that, and encouraging other individuals just by you being you will inspire them to be themselves as well.
Interesting. So, now that you've mentioned that, can you kind of break down for us what the difference in the ages are for the millennials? And, I feel, maybe that's a starting point also, because that's going to be kind of how I'm looking at this show, is how as an old, part of the boomer generation, how to connect more with millennials in how we go through this journey on reconciliation. So if you can also share with us, what are the ages that's falling into these buckets?
Yeah, and I mean, as the generation architect, I get this question a ton. So I've got these numbers readily available. So the baby boomer generation starts from 1946 and goes until 1964. Generation X is 1965 and goes until 1980. Generation Y, or millennial, goes until 1980 up until 1996. And then after that, we start to move into Generation Z.
Okay. One of the things, Koy, that I've been really trying to grapple with this week, and in reference to this same theme of, not having a defeated spirit, you at a very early age, after college and getting into the workforce, you were very focused on, you needed a 6-figure income. You knew, for whatever reason you had that amount in mind, you knew that was something that you need to have in order to have a decent quality of life. And when I look at, working families and working individuals that are working very hard, but they don't have sufficient income to take care of their family needs or quality of life. And I think for some of what I see for happening with the youth in Savannah, that's where part of the disconnect happens at a very early age in school, because they just don't see, well, how is this going to benefit me? I see my parents working hard. They're still arguing about money, and, that's just not where I want to be. How do you go about addressing, I guess generating sufficient income, or, what is that balance? I mean, how did you get there, or how do you talk to the groups that you're interacting with now, as far as, because you're dealing with Fortune 500 companies, how do you get that balance in place? Because they're not going to start at the top, but at some point, how do you share the value in what they're doing in order to have the quality of life that they think they're entitled to?
I love that you use the word entitled there.
Mm-hmm.
And if we choose, we can definitely play with that word and certainly unpack that here in a bit. To directly answer your question, the way that I did it and the way that I would suggest someone do it would be a bit different. And here's why. That I did it was I immediately jumped and I left corporate America, and I realized that wasn't where I wanted to be. I wouldn't recommend going that route.
Okay.
One of the things that I knew that I also had to do, because of where my past had been and because of the way that I grew up with regard to being of a lower income, with immigrant parents, not really having a network here or anything like that. I knew that I had to build a network. So I would recommend for other individuals who might be coming from a similar past as mine, or who could possibly identify with a past like mine, I would suggest going into a corporate setting so that you can begin to build your network.
Okay.
One of the reasons that I am as successful as I am now with regard to speaking engagements and being able to lock in more contracts has so much to do with the network that I begin to build. The second thing that it had to do with was getting and understanding my value so that I could communicate that to someone else.
Okay.
And it's super difficult for you to understand what your value is if you don't quite know what you want to do and you haven't exposed yourself to different things. So that's why I would suggest going the corporate route, which is what I did. The difference that I would make with regard to once you realize what it is that you want to do, I would transition into that, i.e., start that after work, i.e., start that on the weekend, begin to research, etc., begin to build revenue within that whatever side project is until that can now become maybe 60, 70, maybe even 80% of what you were making so that you understand that there's a need that's out there in the market and then transition into it as opposed to what I did, which was, I don't want to do this anymore. Okay, cool. Bye. Right? There was absolutely nothing there. So that would be the difference that I would make, but I would continuously think about how can I begin to build more relationships because all of the resources that we need lie within the relationships that we have.
That's interesting that you're putting it that way because I had this conversation with someone else and we were talking about how important it is to build your community, you know, and and I think it's kind of two-pronged. It's building your community for future relationships as it may relate to what you may want to do further down the line, but it's also building a community which may be very small of support. You know, people that are like-minded or like-spirited, instead of being around a lot of negative energy. Because I'll confess, Koy, when I want a pickup on Facebook, a lot of times I know whose timelines I'm going to go to, and it's typically a millennial. It's typically you. There are a couple of others that I'm like, I know they're going to have something crazy going on, right? And I need that little crazy. I need that little spark of, you know, of still having fun. So I live vicariously like that. And one friend of mine, she has like a theme song that she always, you know, it's like, this is my theme song before I go into an appointment. This is what I've got to hear if I'm having one of those days. But I like your insight on, you know, figuring out, you know, being on whatever track you're on, whether it's the corporate track, putting in the time without being defeated that you're, you know, somehow we've gotten morphed into this society that some positions or having a college education is more important than having a vocational trade. And not everybody is geared to go to college. One of the things I do want to really get into for this show, because I know you're doing this with your daughter, I do want to spend some time in talking about how you go about helping her build a positive identity.
Man, this is a good one. And the reason why it's such a good one is because I remember when I found out that I was going to become a father and all of the fear that surrounded that, because it's extremely difficult to play a role for which you've had no script. which is why I think, to kind of to make sure that we're bridging from the last question to this question, which is why sometimes I think it is difficult for individuals who are coming from a lower income background to become more affluent, because you again are now trying to play a role for which you've had no script. You don't have anyone who is close to you, any family members, any super close friends that you can confide in to be able to really understand what it takes to move to another level, and more importantly, what it takes to stay at that level.
Right.
Because it's not about what it is that you're bringing in. It's about how can you sustain that so that you can create generational wealth moving forward.
Right.
When it comes to my daughter and trying to continue to affirm her, I first had to affirm myself. Because again, this was something that I never had. Like, I never really had super strong conversations with my father until I was 18. And I never spent super exorbitant amounts of time with him either.
Right.
I can remember the exact time that I spent the most amount of time with him in one period of time was when I was 26. We were in Jamaica, and I spent 6 days with him. And that had been the most time that I'd ever spent with him consecutively in my life. So the first thing I had to do was I needed to begin to fix me, if you will, to repair the little boy within me who was still seeking that strength from a male figure, that strength and that role modeling from a father that I didn't have. Now, he and I are great. I love my father, will always love him, but I first needed to do that.
Right.
And now that I've done that, fatherhood has become a bit easier to me because I now realize that it's not my job to create my daughter. And my daughter's name is Araya. Like, there is nothing that I can do to create her. My job is simply to guide her. To
Right.
guide her and to help support her, to continue to affirm her, and to sow into the dreams that she has.
Right. And I can tell you just from some of the postings that I see that you do on Facebook, it really looks like you have a fun time with your daughter.
I love, so she brings out the kid in me. So I was actually talking about this yesterday again at the keynote at Austin Energy, that, hey, if my energy is super high right now, it's probably because I've got this Halloween hangover because I had to taste a lot of candy just to make sure it was good, I mean, I feel like that's the job you have as a parent.
Right.
Just to make sure that you're protecting your children, and that spills over into the candy department too. Hey, baby girl, let me make sure all this is good. Let me try this out and taste that.
Right.
Have a, but I mean, that's the joys of parenthood, and really the joys that we as adults should really indulge in more.
Embrace.
Right?
I agree.
We have the rest of our lives to be adults.
Right.
And that's definitely one of the things that I continue to tell her as well. She just turned 8 on the 26th of October, and I said, baby, don't be in such a rush to grow up. It's so crazy how whenever we were younger, we were in such a rush to grow up, and now that we're older,
I know.
this thing, that is cracked up to me, right? It's like, man, this whole adulting thing is not what I thought it was gonna be.
It's more than a notion, and you wait till you get just a little bit older, because I'm older than you. You just wait. It's not for the weak. Aging is not for the weak. I do need to take a short break just to do this this PSA announcement. But what I want to come back with is, I've heard from several people, especially in the church sector, but I've also heard it in the employment sector. But in the church sector, there seems to be this whole gyration of, well, what do we do to attract millennials? What do we do to attract? It's like this whole different phenomenon, this whole different way of communication. So I'm going to leave you with that thought. Don't hang up. Just hold on. I'm going to make this announcement, and then I'll be back with you, okay? Join WRUU radio listeners, hosts, volunteers, and supporters at our annual meeting and party on this upcoming Sunday afternoon. This yearly event is a celebration of all the time, treasure, and talent given by the Savannah community in support of this radio station. We've grown so much this past year because of the hard work and dedication of so many people. This party will give us a chance to highlight such achievements and thank all those who make 107.5 FM Savannah's best radio station. This free event will include music, an open house, and Southern-inspired food and drinks. That's Sunday, November 5th, from 4 to 8 p.m. at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Savannah Fellowship Hall. The entrance is on the 300 block of East Macon Street. For more information, find our event page on Facebook or visit wruu.org. Okay, Koy, so what are your thoughts? Because, and not everyone even attends church. I happen to be one of those people. I like the fellowship, and I like the spirituality connected with that. But it has been a journey to get to where I am in this place. But I've really never engaged with trying to think about how to attract more youth into church, into that kind of structure. Because part of it to me is just kind of like it has to be part of their, I don't know, journey already. I mean, I have no idea. But do you have some thoughts on that? Because I have people that say, well, we need to do music different. We need to do our services different. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that we're starting to see this more and more and more. And the way that I will approach this question is not just from a church perspective, but from a business and organization perspective, because not only will that cover church, it will also broaden it up a bit more, because, again, these are conversations that I'm having constantly. And we have this very large aging population, right? So we've got baby boomers 1946 to 1964, roughly 76.5 million individuals.
Right.
That from today's date and every single day to follow until 2030, 10,000 people will turn 65 every single day.
Wow.
We will have one of the largest living older generations that this country has ever seen. We are in a very, very interesting time right now, because we've never had so many generations in the workplace. We've never had so many generations that are now vying for some of the same resources. And it's just such an interesting time. But to now really dig down and get into your question with regard to millennials, there is a CPI index that I use for all of my clients. And the CPI index will really begin to help individuals start to attract millennials, and I believe will start to attract other younger generations as they begin to come up as well. Because there are some things that are shifting, and one of those things is we're shifting from willpower, i.e., kind of pushing yourself to do something and get things done, to why power, which is something that is pulling you, right? Because there is a difference between waking up in the morning and pushing yourself out of bed to brush your teeth shower and put on your clothes to go into a 9 to 5, as opposed to waking up out of bed and being pulled to go and do what it is that you love to do, right? There's a stark difference. So we're moving from willpower to why power, and with that being the case, this CPI index is something that will begin to not only help churches or organizations, but also help companies and businesses as well. And the C stands for culture, the P stands for purpose, and the I stands for impact. So with the C, with culture, you now need to look within your business and or organization and figure out what is our company culture. Because as much as we would like to believe, individuals do not lead companies or brands, they lead people.
Right.
People lead people, right?
Right.
So with that being said, what is the culture that your company has? What is the community that your company is building? And then we move into the purpose, right? What is the purpose that your business, your company, your organization is now serving, right? How is your business, your company, your organization moving the community forward, moving the world forward? And then we begin to tap into the I, which is the impact. And the impact has so much to do with the radio station that everybody is tuned to, and it's WIIFM. What it is
for me.
Right?
Yes.
How is now me joining your organization, your company, your business going to impact the world? What is my impact going to be with your company or organization? If you cannot show me that, if you cannot express that to me, if you cannot help me to see that,
right,
then you missed me.
Interesting. And
because that's what happens to my why.
Right. And I'm really seeing that in some of the things that I'm engaging in, even within my own community, is like what is the motivation for young people to join an organization that we have that is really there to protect the value that we built in the community with having services and recreation services. I mean, we're very blessed that there were others before us that saw the benefit of protecting real estate. And so we have a nice community center. We have facilities that are taken care of by the city of Savannah. But we also have an aging population in our little membership that we are looking at what's the next gyration. And so I'm definitely going to share this with them because that was the question that I was asking. It's like, well, why should anyone join this? I mean, what's in it for them? What's the benefit for them?
And we have to find that.
Right. And so I think the question, or to me, what happens, because I've been in the corporate world, is there seems to be a resistance to making that change. And I don't know whether it's fear. I don't know no one likes change, right? I mean, everybody likes to, I jokingly said to someone at church, is like, you should, and this was the rector of the church, I said, you should make everybody sit in a different seat next Sunday. Because there are people that if sit in a different place, they'll say to me, oh, you're sitting someplace else because, and I'm like, well, I just like to get a different perspective. Did we do something to offend? They're jokingly asking, did we offend you? But there is some level that they're serious. They're like, is there something we did? Or, and I'm like, no. I said, but I realize we are creatures of habit. We sit in the same place. And we typically, buy the same thing from the grocery store. We don't like change. And do you have some suggestions how, in a particular culture, how people can start addressing change?
Wow. Change is something that is inevitable. That is number one. The second thing is, I think that we should really begin to change, not even change, we should begin to open our minds to a possibility of a new perspective on the word change, and more importantly, on this conversation of we as human beings not liking change. Because
Right.
I have a perspective that is not that. I don't think that human beings don't like change. In fact, I believe that human beings love change.
Mm.
Because the moment that you go out and you buy some new shoes, you like that. You like to get new clothes. I love to get a haircut. Right?
But here's the thing. What happens when you're buying the same shoes that you already, I mean, someone jokingly says, said to a female, a joke, is like, well, how many pairs of black shoes do you need to have? It's like we buy the same type of clothes. We may buy something new, but it's the same style.
So I think that as opposed to saying that we don't like change, I think that there's another way that we could say it. And I think that the way that we could say it is, what I believe is we all have a fear of loss.
Mm.
So if we now go back to your analogy with individuals now wanting to sit in the same seat every time they come to church.
Right.
What the issue is if I change seats, I fear that I might not have the same sight line to the stage. I might not be able to hear the band playing as well as I did before. I might not be able to sit next to the person that I normally sit next to. There's a fear of loss here.
Okay.
And one of the things that we can begin to do to combat that fear of loss is begin to speak about what has happened, or begin to help individuals imagine a time that when they were now about to experience change, or what they thought was going to be a loss, it turned out to be absolutely amazing. And how can we now begin to rewire our thoughts and our minds around what change really means? I think about how excited my daughter was when she turned 8 years old on the 26th of October. She couldn't wait.
Yeah.
And that's a major milestone in her life, right?
Right.
Change. She could not wait for it. How can we now begin to get that same excitement around the changes that are going on and that are happening in our lives? And another great way to do that is by asking yourself a question. And this question was absolutely pivotal for me to now be able to let go of a lot of the stresses that come with change, especially unexpected change.
Right.
And the question that I ask myself is, what's the best that could happen?
Not what's the worst that could happen, but what's the best that could happen?
What's the best that could happen, right? I ask myself the affirmative, because the moment that you begin to ask yourself questions, your brain, the supercomputer that it is, begins to find the answers for you.
Right.
But you continue to ask negative questions. So, of course, you're going to find negative answers.
Right.
But how can you now change that question to the affirmative to begin to get you thinking about the best possible outcomes and how you can now become receptive to those, open to those, and more importantly, aware of them?
Right. And one of the things, especially that I'm really trying to embrace being back in Savannah is, really being curious about different cultures. In using this time to even be curious about learning about the city and geographically where things are, and trying different. Unfortunately, Savannah's not a big city, and it doesn't have some of the challenges that Austin has with the traffic. So I can experiment with different ways of going to different places, and just really taking a moment. But I do encourage everyone to be curious and go to different events and festivals and feel comfortable in talking to people that don't look like you, that don't dress like you or talk like you. And I think that ties into the change factor. But getting back to your daughter, because I know, that's especially with you being a dad, raising your daughter and having that influence on her. And I can tell you, I know so many girls that are daddy's girls. I was a daddy girl. And so, I mean, it's incredible the amount of influence that you have that you probably don't even know that you do have with her. What are some of the things, and of course, realizing, and I shouldn't say she's only 8, but she's now 8. What are some of the things that you talk to her about at this point in time that stand out to you?
I wish there was really a book on parenthood. I call myself an 8-year rookie, right? Like, I'm an 8-year rookie. I'm still figuring this thing out. There are questions that she asked me that I was not prepared for at all. At all. And I mean, it runs the gamut, It runs the gamut from marriage to same-sex marriage to...
Uh-oh. Koy, we have got some interference that I'm picking up. I don't know whether because you're driving, you've hit a certain point that is creating the distortion, and you may we may have dropped you. And I know how that trek is if you're making that trek back and forth from San Antonio. Yes, we've lost you. So if you can call back in. And actually, as I look at the time, we really only have about 5 more minutes with Koy, and he's calling back in. So let me get him back on that so we can finish up. Okay, Koy, can you hear us?
Yes, boy, when technology doesn't want you to be great. Come on.
Well, I know what that. I just knew when I heard it. I was kind of keeping my fingers across through this entire interview, thinking, okay, at any point now he's going to hit a dead spot. I just know it. I'm sorry. I am that negative person, and I should have been thinking, oh, this is going to be great. You're. It is all good. It all works out for the best, but. So you were saying, like you're an 8-year rookie with your daughter.
Yes, an 8-year rookie with my daughter, and her questions run the gamut. From pets to her own YouTube channel to transgender individuals and marriage, and I was not ready or prepared for the types of questions that I was going to be getting.
Because they're so much smarter than they seem to be more aware.
Not only is it an awareness, there's also so much more that's coming at them, right?
Okay.
With the technology that we have now at our disposal, and just with the way that culture is changing here in the United States, things are shifting. I remember a time when TV used to go off.
Right.
The television doesn't go off anymore. I remember a time when there was no cursing on any kind of like public network that you could get at home, like CBS and ABC,
right.
Fox. Now, come on. I remember whenever there was a time that they wouldn't even show sexually suggestive things on television. Things are shifting, and they're shifting so rapidly, and because of the shift, we're now starting to see the results of these shifts. I mean, you've got a show now that's called Modern Family, and within Modern Family, you have a homosexual couple that have also adopted a child. When before, you you wouldn't even see that on TV, right? So
Right.
so things are shifting with the culture, and because things are shifting with the culture, and with the acceptance of things, you're now going to start to get different questions. You're now going to start to get questions about marriage, about same-sex marriage, about some sexually suggested questions as well. It's just like, oh my gosh, it's like, where is this coming from? But again, the culture is shifting and the culture is changing, and if it's not happening at your house, it's probably happening at someone else's house
Right.
who's going to come in contact with your child at some point in time, right? It's like there's no way to raise your child in a bubble. And as much as I would love that, right? So I wouldn't have to discuss some of these things with her. I understand that that's not the case. So, for me, it is, as I'm listening to these questions, it's trying to find some of the trends that are happening and becoming a bit more proactive and asking her what her thoughts and her opinions are on these particular issues and matters, so that it's not me now trying to indoctrinate her with my dogma, right, and what I think and what I feel. Because, again, it's not my job to create her.
Right.
I'm just here to guide her and support her.
Wow. Well, on that note, I can't believe how quickly time has moved along, and I'm glad I didn't hear any screeching tires or a car accident, anything happening that I would have to go, Koy? So as we wrap up today, are there any final thoughts you want to share with us about how to go about day to day, not falling into, the grind, or tapping into our grit, so that we don't succumb to having a defeated spirit?
I think I would like to share a quote that I read just yesterday, and the quote said that one of the greatest myths that man has taken in is the fact that they think that they are working for someone else. And the first time I read it, I was like, okay. But then when I allowed that to sink in more, it really hit me. Because every single thing that we are doing, everything that we are involved with, everything that we are touching has our essence to it. And you should treat everything as such. Everything is building you. You are growing through what you are going through, and that is how you can continue to keep your eye on the prize.
Oh, wow. That is awesome. I'm going to be bugging you about, you need to write a book, right? But this has been awesome. Thank you so much for calling in, sharing your time, especially as you're driving. And I know that can in some ways be a challenge, especially, just trying to stay focused where you're not too distracted by these awesome topics. And I'm sure at some point in the future, I'm going to have you back, because this is very interesting. It's very intense. I think it's something that we're all grappling with in one way or the other. And I think it's so important that we have these spaces that are safe, that we can have an honest and open, productive conversations. And I appreciate you, Koy, for spending time on the One Human Nation show.
I appreciate you, Sandy, for, number one, having this show, and number two, really answering the call. Because there's a lot of us who get the call, and we will let that bad boy ring and ring and ring. So I thank you so much for answering the call, to be able to create a space like this for individuals such as myself to come on and feel safe and be able to, of course, dive into some of these topics. So thank you so much, Sandy.
All righty. Thank you. Take care. And until we talk again.
Talk soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to the One Human Nation show, and we're finishing up another session with Koy McDermott, which was very interesting. And as we get ready for the top of the hour with Troy Stoner with Sound Limit, I leave you with the thought of being curious about different cultures, exposing yourself to more change or more openness to what the experiences could be, so that it's not what you're going to lose, but what you're actually going to gain. Thanks for listening to the One Human Nation show, and have a good week.